Now, if the far right wins an absolute majority, or if the left or right wings form an alliance to lead, President Emmanuel Macron will enter into an arrangement called cohabitation. This is when France's president and prime minister come from different parties. It's happened in the past, though not for 20 years, and cohabitation comes with a set of challenges for both sides. Joining to help explain these challenges is France 24 reporter Claire Paccalin. Hello there, Claire.
Hi.
So what can you tell us about this unusual arrangement?
Well, cohabitation. If the president does not have a majority in parliament, which, given the results of the first round of the parliamentary elections on Sunday, it does seem quite likely that Macron will not get a majority after the second round on Sunday, he will have to choose a prime minister from whichever bloc, whichever group or party has the most seats in parliament. If he doesn't, if he decides to choose a prime minister that he wants, well then Parliament could just vote out that government again and again, as many times as they want, until they get the prime minister they want. So basically in a cohabitation you end up with two leaders, a president and a prime minister. They're not from the same political family, but they have to find a way of working together.
So for those of us who come from countries where this isn't the political arrangement, who's really in charge in France, the president or the prime minister?
Well, what's interesting is that outside France, we often think of the French president as having a lot of powers for a democracy. And that is the case when the president has a majority in parliament. But if he doesn't, or if she doesn't, the prime minister actually has far more powers than people realise. To get a sense, though, of what possible future cohabitations could look like, the best thing to do is to look at the past. So in 1986, we saw the first cohabitation when left-wing François Mitterrand, there he is, speaking to the press, was president, and right-wing Jacques Chirac was his prime minister. I think we've got a photo. There we go. There's Jacques Chirac in 1986. And we can listen now to a soundbite from the historian Jean Garrigue, who describes the first cabinet meeting between Mitterrand and Chirac when that cohabitation started in 1986.
The first cabinet meeting of the first cohabitation in 1986 took place in an icy atmosphere because the president was totally isolated in the face of a government made up of his opponents. François Mitterrand in the middle, as cold as stone, while the others didn't dare smile.
So Chirac went about undoing a lot of Mitterrand's previous work. Chirac was the prime minister, but really he had a lot of power. Chirac privatised organisations which Mitterrand had nationalised just a few years earlier. Chirac got things done. What's interesting, though, is that many French people actually remember Mitterrand being the strongest partner in the relationship. He was older, he was more experienced, he was also a very, very, very clever political character. And Anne Le Vaugeron, who was a former advisor to François Mitterrand, she described what kind of a person he was. Mitterrand really was an extremely clever politician.
François Mitterrand did not let himself be deterred. He had an ability to impose himself that was astonishing. He did not budge.
So Mitterrand and Chirac actually almost clashed in public on the international stage, which was a little bit embarrassing for France at the time. It was at the G7 summit in Tokyo in the 80s. Mitterrand went as president and Chirac came too. And they both wanted to embody the voice of France on the international stage. So as you can imagine, there was too many men with egos in one room. There's Chirac, you can see behind Mitterrand. That Chirac was basically relegated. There he is, sitting down in the seats while he had to watch Mitterrand take centre stage. Mitterrand was the one who said, "I am the voice of France." And we can listen to that soundbite now.
Il n'y a qu'une voix de la France. Ceci est dit une fois pour toutes.
So it was an embarrassing episode for France, and the two men tried to behave better afterwards because they didn't want to tarnish France's image. But it is really interesting because we do see the French president as this very powerful figure, but only when he has a majority in parliament. And when he does not, and when his prime minister is from a different political party, well, that prime minister can get a lot done that the French president wouldn't like.
Okay, so France went through this difficult cohabitation period in the 80s. How many times has it happened since then?
It's happened twice more. So in 1993, the left-wing François Mitterrand again was in cohabitation, but this time with the right-wing Prime Minister, Edouard Balladur. There he is, Balladur just in front, Mitterrand just behind. And this is a soundbite now we can play from Mitterrand in 1993. He's sounding stoic, but he was obviously very disappointed that the French chose the right wing in parliamentary elections.
Vous avez marqué votre volonté d'une autre politique. Cette volonté sera scrupuleusement respectée.
So it was different this time. Mitterrand was ill. He was very unwell. He had to cancel meetings with his Prime Minister, Edouard Balladur. He sometimes even did the meetings lying down. Sometimes he had to leave the meeting because he was in so much pain. He didn't resign, though. But it was definitely a different cohabitation from what we saw in the 80s between Mitterrand and Chirac. Then again, 1997, Jacques Chirac was back and he was president by now. And he found himself in cohabitation with the left-wing Lionel Jospin. You can see there voting in the parliamentary elections in 1997. The left united back in 1997, and the French chose this united left in parliamentary elections. So here you can see Jospin speaking in 1997.
Simplement, le président de la République m'a proposé de me nommer Premier ministre et j'ai accepté.
So the two men, Chirac and Jospin, did not really get on. They tried to get on in public because they didn't want the French to turn on whoever was acting in an ugly way. But it's interesting, we spoke to an expert in the Constitution who described this to a divorce, whereby the first parent who criticizes the other in front of the children, they're out of the match. And it was a similar thing between Chirac and Jospin. They knew they couldn't criticize each other in public because the French wouldn't like it. But they ended up competing against each other at the end of the cohabitation because there was a presidential election coming up in 2002. And that really poisoned their relationship because they ended up being real political rivals.
So based on history, cohabitation does not appear to be a cozy situation. But as France heads into the second round of parliamentary elections on Sunday, what can we expect?
So we are looking at a very different political landscape now. We have President Emmanuel Macron, who's a centrist. We could find that the far right gets the most seats in parliament. We could find that Emmanuel Macron has this candidate, Jordan Bardella, which the far right is pushing. They want him to be the next prime minister. We also have the left, which is united. But we're hearing a lot about the far left politician, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Many on the left has denied that they want him as their prime minister, but it's a possibility. There's also a possibility of a different candidate. Many of criticisms of Emmanuel Macron and many of his opponents say any future prime minister cannot be a Macronist. We also have this possibility that people are beginning to talk about a little bit now. We've never seen this before in the Fifth Republic in France, which was put in place in 1958. We've never seen this before. The possibility of a technocratic government for a temporary period of time where you would have economists and diplomats and civil servants. But basically, what I can say is that until Sunday's second round of the elections, we do not know what the National Assembly is going to look like, and we do not know who will be the next Prime Minister of France.
Claire Paccalin, thank you. I learned a lot during this. And you and Sonia Baratello, you filmed a whole France in Focus report about cohabitation. If you want to learn even more, you can visit our website, france24.com, and watch that. It's called French Politics, Working with the Enemy.